Hello, everyone. Welcome to UMD Media. Today, we are coming back with the H panel in a new time. So we are starting today, every week on Fridays, 1 hour earlier. That's 8 p.m. Eastern Time and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. The H panel starts now. So we are back with the national dialogue parameters. That's the topic for today. National dialogue parameters, and we will start as usual with what are the big ticket items for each panel the past week. We'll start with Faisal. Faisal, welcome again. Hope your week was great. So, what stood out for you this week?
Well, thank you very much. I think there are a lot of things that stood up for me, but I will try to be a bit local this time and see what has transpired in a big way in the Somali regional state. As you know, Prime Minister Abiy paid a quick visit to the region. He arrived at Jigjiga and spent for about 1 hour maximum. He came to the airport. He was received at the VIP by Mustafa Omar and his team. And then he was flown by an helicopter to a very, not that far, about 50 kilometers from where he arrived. He could have driven, but he took an helicopter, visited a site, supposedly, that's supposed to be one of the holding grounds for the famine-stricken Somalis in the region. Some people are reported to have walked to get where they are, about 700 kilometers from Qabri Dahar, which is close to the border side of Ethiopia and Somalia, all the way up to the suburbs of Chichiga. Literally 700 kilometers. Those people walked with their kids, some animals dying in the way, only for water. So between the point of departure to their destination, they have lost a lot of their animals. Abiy was also showing dead animals. I'm not sure whether dead animals were placed nearby or he was walked through some of the areas where the animal is dying. But massive animal death has been experienced by the Somalis within a short period of time. Between the time we spoke and wrote about the famine, if you recall, Getachew, up to now, the issue is bigger than what we thought. And exactly, this is one of the sites he visited. And what was very sad to me was he was speaking in Amharic to population where none of them, zero, speak and understand Amharic. That is again the background of the relationship between Somalis and the Ethiopian state. He also used a language that doesn't fit what's in the program of the government. The Somali region, along with the Oromo Borana, have been designated as in the strategic papers of the government and economic approach, the pastoral community. He never used the pastoral community of Somalis. He kept using this old Haile Selassie era language of lowland, the Kolla people. And that was, again, I don't know if he missed it or it was an intent, but he never articulated the nomenclature that the socio-economic system is used, which is pastoral versus farm agricultural, and he used here people of the dry land. That's exactly what he used. So he basically tried to empathize with the public and understand and say we are with you. Uh, the sad story is this famine has been developing for the last 2 years. As you recall, Ethiopia was attacked by the locust in 2021. The Tigray war started. The Oromo war started. Oromo production of agriculture, upon which Somalis heavily depend, didn't materialize in the last 2 years. The drought and lack of rain, literally all this compounded with the economic crisis, and they have been watching. So for them to now speak about the famine, and it's just a sign of again state failure. Just one last thing. After Mustafa PM Abiy spoke to the public, Mustafa took over the microphone, and not only did he make a huge mistake and mishap, but he literally insulted the people and basically did something akin to the French queen, who said when she was told that people are demonstrating because they don't have bread, she said, "Why don't they have? Why don't they eat the cake or let them eat the cake?" 1880s. Mustafa literally talked to these people that you see, and he said, "Don't be dependent. Go and work. Go back to your work. What you have been doing." It was really a hit under the belt, and this is recorded. This speech is in the record and in the repository. Not to mention the fact that there was nothing promised to them except to say that things would be better. And one last thing. The next day, yesterday, Mustafa on his face account literally chided and punished the one person who got up and spoke to Abiy directly and said, "Please, Prime Minister, until the famine situation is managed, will you tell your the finance police who are robbing Somali traders, the food that they bring from the Somaliland borders, to just leave us alone for a while?" And Mustafa called those people blood-sucking traders. So this is really, there is a huge disjoint between what the public is experiencing and what government officials are thinking on a daily basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. Yusuf, what stood out for you this week?
Uh, what stood out for me this week is a subject matter that I have been very much interested before. We have talked with you about the Nobel Committee. They came out with some kind of admonishment against Abiy, which was a very slight one. And uh, to me, there was an interview done with the chairperson uh, of the committee. If you could play that,
Yeah.
you would see. Uh, there
Let,
was three. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
okay.
I 100% agree that, it's not as if you have a crystal ball. Of course, you could not have foreseen what would have happened in Tigray and what Abiy Ahmed would go on to do. That being said, though, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, I think it was roughly around a year and a half after coming to power. And of course, as you know, Ethiopia is a very complicated country just in terms of violence and in terms of ethnic divisions and that sort of thing. Given that you awarded him a little over a year after coming to power, do you think that perhaps you jumped the gun and he was given the award too soon?
This is a question often placed to the Nobel Committee: have we given prizes too soon? I would like to reverse that question. If we were always sure of the outcome of a peace effort, the Nobel Peace Prize wouldn't have been as relevant as it in fact has been through 120 years. The Peace Prize is a reward for a success in a peace effort that Prime Minister Abiy definitely could claim, but also an aspirational prize towards continuing the path of peace. And the Nobel Committee making the statement we have made is not passing judgment on the war in Ethiopia, which ones of the parties are right or wrong. But what I am emphasizing is that carrying the Peace Prize is a very heavy cloak to carry. And it rests a certain responsibility on Prime Minister Abiy in contributing seriously to peace and entering negotiations instead of using military means only to solve the situation in his country.
That's okay. All right, okay. One of the things that interested me was the vetting process. After this one, the question that she was asked was, about the vetting process. And she said that is a secret. She cannot talk about it. Which goes with we have talked about it before, but there was as Zaid said, there was a year and a half in between. I think it was the PM Abiy came into power in April 2018, and the Nobel Prize was given on October 2019. Now, if you could look at this one, number one, if they had done their vetting right, if they have done their vetting right, the number one thing that comes out right was the displacement, the massive displacement that happened early on throughout Ethiopia, especially from the southern part of Ethiopia. You remember, millions of people were displaced, and exactly as Faisal was saying, there was no empathy towards those IDPs. In fact, he only visited them a year ago, and he showed no empathy at that time. Then there were the high-profile assassinations. Even if we don't know exactly whether he was behind it or not, he used every assassination to consolidate his power. Remember that one. Then there was the hate language that he has been using especially against the people of Tigray. And above all, there was this toxic cocktail, of modern despots that could be easily gleaned from what Abiy was saying, was writing. For example, that he was a shallow thinker, prone to plagiarism. He has been accused of plagiarism many times. That he was a delusional leader. Remember the case that he was destined to be the seventh king. Then there was his charlatanism, his Madamar, vacuous ideologies that you could have easily found out if they have asked the proper people. Then there was the religious input, the fanaticism that we have seen with a prosperity church that equates riches with virtues, apocalyptic aspirations that have no room for peace. And also we have also seen that how he became a pathological liar, almost in every speech that he makes, almost like a Trumpian kind of mold. So we see all of this, yet the Nobel Prize keeps saying that their vetting process is secret, and therefore they cannot talk about it. But above all, what worried me was that they are unaware how he exploited the Nobel Peace Prize towards the war effort in Ethiopia. Not only does it give him, a perfect cover for the war preparations that he was conducting, it was also a means. It became a means of facilitating the war itself, because that was the thing that gave him the green light, you could say. And then there was also, I believe it was yes, the peace pact that she talked about. She said that at least he could claim the success in the peace effort at the beginning. But that peace pact, of course, we know now that it turned out to be a war pact between Eritrea and Ethiopia. And it was facilitated by Saudi Arabia and UAE, both nations that have been financing the war in Ethiopia, and UAE that have also supplied Ethiopia with drones. So in general, what we see is they didn't only give the wrong price to the wrong man. I mean, the price to the wrong man, but also the price itself became instrumental in facilitating the war itself. And the Nobel Peace Prize, they seem to say we didn't make a mistake at the beginning when we vetted him. Not only that, they are also saying now, in fact, she said, since the conditions in Ethiopia are very complex and complicated. Reading between the lines, what she is saying is that when all of this is sorted out, it might be the case that our choice, Abiy, is the peaceful man that we have already told. So they haven't even give up hope on him at this at the moment that admonishing him, they haven't even give up hope on him. So you could see how detrimental their role have been in general.
Thank you, Yosef. Professor Scale?
Thank you. There isn't a particular event or incident that stood out for me, but the sort of the split screen on the Ethiopian scene of continuing crisis and deepening crisis, but two are juxtaposed. These two plays are juxtaposed on the Ethiopian scene. That is, on the one hand, there is famine and drought. Of course, famine is basically leadership failure. It's man-made. Drought is recurrent. This is happening all over the country. Faisal talked about the Somali regional state, but it is the same in southern Oromia. And even in areas where there were no conflict and where there is no drought, because people were not farming, people were not engaged in economic activities, and they were not even harvesting what they had cultivated, there is going to be a shortage. And there is already a shortage of services and goods and supplies in areas where there was no active conflict. So what we are seeing today in terms of the famine and the shortage of food, what we see today is the effect of the war itself that started about a year ago. The impact of the continued war, or what is happening today, we're going to see it next year. The shortage of food supplies and other basic necessities is going to show itself next year, not now. But as it is, there is famine, pronounced famine in the Somali area and the southern Oromia region, and there is food shortage in the Tigray region and even in the Amhara region. So there is a deepening crisis in that regard. And there is also continuing conflict. The government is saying that they have won the war. Of course, some generals are saying that they're going to continue the war, and of course, they're preparing for that. So even though many expect that there is a lull in the fighting, there is actually conflict, continuing conflict in Tigray, in the eastern part of Tigray and Afar region. There is continued engagement in six districts or 6 waradas in the Afar region are now under TDF control because of the relentless attack from that side to try to capture Me'ele. So there is this famine and drought. On the one hand, there is continuing conflict in Tigray, and there is also conflict in Western Ethiopia. From information that I have, there's about 2 divisions of mechanized divisions of the Ethiopian National Defense Forces heading toward the west. From some unconfirmed report that I have, there is also an airport that is being repurposed in western part of Ethiopia, close to the Sudanese border, that's going to be used for drone landing and hitting OLA targets in southwestern Wolaga region. So that is one side of the drama. On the other side, in the capital city, you will see Parliament convening and approving an additional budget of $2.4 $4 or $5 billion in additional budgetary appropriation. And of that, 2 billion is allocated for defense, and 45 is allocated for other needs in the government. So you can see this the split screen there. There is famine. There is like 40% of the people in Tigray are in dire need of food and other supplies. But the parliament is allocating additional budget, $2.45 billion, of which $2 billion is allocated to defense. And the other thing on that column, on that split screen that I saw, is something that is really indicating to me continuing political crisis in the context of the government's celebration that they had won the war. And because they say they had won the war against their enemies, of course they're not consistent even in their discourse about this. But there is an appointment of generals last week. Generals were created. Lieutenant generals were made full generals. The one full general that was already a 4-star general is a field marshal. But the generals are two of the generals, the lieutenant generals that were made 4-star generals, are now appointed ambassadors. What is going on? Does the government know what it is doing? And that's the other thing that you see on the government side. And thirdly, there is rampant rumors that are actually confusing legitimate and credible media sources that some of the popular people that had played a very significant role in bringing about the transition, or the aborted transition now, like Lamma Magarsa, are going to go back to Ethiopia and to be appointed to higher positions in the government, which is completely untrue, totally untrue. But this is going on. So in the end, what I wanted to say is that in this split screen, what I see is that the government is continuing to play and manipulate images while people are dying. So that is really what stood out for me, this split screen. And of course, in this context, there is also a continued talk and reactions to the proposition to have a national dialogue.
Great, thank you, Professor Esquel. So maybe part of what you mentioned will also lead us to the topic of the day, the national dialogue parameters. We have touched upon that in different ways before, but today we want to go deeper in terms of what's being said and what others who would potentially who could be critical elements of this negotiation or dialogue. Dialogue is the right term in this case for everyone. So how do you see this play out given what we are seeing? The recent one that we covered last week was the 63 or more than 60 Oromo organizations in the diaspora, community, civic, and I think 3 groups of categories of Oromo organizations issuing a statement, and then we have ONLF issuing a statement. We will be displaying that shortly. So what do you see playing out, Faisal, in terms of this national dialogue versus what the government has been cooking well before the election?
Yes, I think I'll just probably kind of recapture the 5 issues that both myself and Esquel touched on different bases in terms of what the state at this point in time is facing. I think we are talking about a failure. Before I even go into the mediation, dialogue talks, national talks, we have at our hand a completely failed state under the pressure of that locust that invaded the country about 2 years ago, the climate change that is, causing a lot of harm, not only to the dry areas, as Abiy called it, but also to productive sector of the Ethiopian economy, such as agricultural belts of Oromia and southern parts of the country. We have the war now refinanced by this new budget, 90 billion birr of the 126 billion birr. Only 8 billion birr is allocated for the farming. So that tells you the priority of the current government and where it lies. It's not really a priority that speaks to saving lives. It's a priority that's still in a war mood. And then runaway corruption. Basically, at least in the Somali region, which I've been observing, you think leaders are running away. The way they are taking money out of the country and out of the region, the corruption and stealing and embezzlement is also a sign of the fact that Addis Ababa has lost control and has no connection. Having said that, I think before we even talk about the material and the content of the national dialogue, we need to look at what we see as outsiders and people who have issues with the current system, what we would have observed in terms of dialogue vis-a-vis the government. I think Abiy's government sees the current proposed dialogue, which is still fuzzy, as an opportunity for his extra coronation after the Tigray war. The people that he picked up and the elements that would be the commission for this reconciliation is not really people that you would depend on. At least I know the Somali name touted at this point in time. He has been with the EPRDF, TPLF from 1991 up to now, either a minister, a high-level ambassador, an advisor to the government, and within the Somali spectrum, he is somebody whom Somalis regard as one of the people who contributed to their plight. So that's the Abiy side, the people that he's putting as the commission and who will draft all the language. Then there is the groups like OLF, ONLF, OLA, TPLF, the dissident groups, if you will, or the warring side, and some of them not warring side. They have completely rejected this talk because they don't want it to just come to a table where everything has been restructured in light of Abiy's vision. Then there is the broad brush group of, if you will, activists, intellectuals, people in the diaspora, people inside the country who are not being counted in right now as participants of the. So we are not following the traditional mechanism of conflict resolution in order to bring this war into closure. We are not hearing different voices. The space that we are creating at this point in time in Addis Ababa is not welcoming to everybody who will have participated at these talks. So basically, neither the language being used, nor the strategies, nor the space to be. I'm glad you are putting this. The space that is going to be utilized as the venue is not really conducive. One thing I will just add to conclude: regional governments like Oromia region, the Somali region, and others outside Tigray region are being urged to silence the voices one way or another that may object to the terms of the talks. ONLF is a good example where the local government is trying to really co-opt, if not silence, and then come to Addis Ababa at the table to say everything in the region is controlled and everything is agreed. Therefore, as Somalis, we are participating this conference as if though there is a unified Somali opinion around the failure of the state, which I think there is none. So instead of really saying this would be talks for everybody, it's a manipulated and managed talk system where the current existing administration would just bring different faces with one voice. Again, I will go back to that Musafeni and EPRDF era, where people can be different in terms of their faces and what have you, but the voice that comes to the table is unified, and that voice would be one that speaks or articulates with the central government at that particular one. That is the venue and that's the pathway, the way I see this current talks are following. They are not going to address what we talked earlier, which is transitional justice, reconciliation, and even transformative justice and acknowledgement of past harms done either to the current groups such as Tigray and Oromia, but also to past groups such as Somalis who have tremendously suffered under previous administration. So ultimately, this is a way to give credibility to the current government so that they can go on with minimal change. And they are not even expecting to change not only at the federal level, but there is no expectation on their part to even make or show change at the regional government level. And most people are suffering not at the federal level only, but also at the regional level. Most politics is taking place in the Somali region, in the Oromo region, in the Sidama region, and what have you. So if change is expected from these talks, it has to be comprehensive, and we don't see that at this point.
Professor Scale, I just want to go to you on this one. There is the government established National Dialogue Commission, and there is the OLA and PLF. They cannot come just directly to the national dialogue. There should be negotiations, ceasefire, all that. And on top, we have those who could easily agree with the PP, the Prosperity Party. And then you have those who are for the multi-ethnic or multi-federation that recognizes the identity of communities, all that. So how do you see the demands from, for example, the Oromo communities in diaspora, and your reading of the politics in Oromia, agree or disagree, if at all, with the what the government has been developing in terms of the commission, all that?
I mean, it's kind of difficult to even begin to imagine whether people agree to a national dialogue or not. I think what you see about 60 plus Oromo organizations in the diaspora in the statement that they put out, the assumption is that national dialogue is probably something that Ethiopia and Ethiopians need. And national dialogues have recently gained some momentum globally because they are used increasingly as a political tool in deeply divided societies for conflict resolution and for transforming politics locally. But it could also lend itself for political manipulation if it's not done right. And there are, of course, these national dialogues must be designed to address specific issues and or unique problems, political problems in any country. So there is no a standard or one size fits all design. Each country must design it to address its own specific problems. But there are principles. There are principles that must be observed to see to it that the national dialogue succeeds. And this is not simply theory. This is some countries, a number of countries have, in the last 10 years or so, have gone through this process to try to deal with their broad-based and complicated political problems, to transform the political issues in a new light and then agree to resolve them by bringing diverse groups of people, stakeholders, as they say, and then all stakeholders. So what is important in here is there are principles that must be fulfilled for this to work. One is inclusivity, that they must be inclusive, they must be broad-based in terms of the issues that they deal with. It should be participatory, and it should be impartial, and the convener must be credible. All of these all of these issues are not fulfilled uh, in in uh, in the design of the national dialogue. For one, this government, or the Prosperity Party government, uh, had been requested for almost 3 to now 4 years to have some kind of a national dialogue. In fact, what my own friends were asking, what we were asking was like at least an elite bargain to transition, to make the transition successful in this country. The prime minister expressly refused to do that and had refused to do that until he won the elections. So he's doing it on his own time, not responding to the demands that exist in the country. And in the design of the current national dialogue, every principle that is needed for success of a national dialogue had been already violated. So I don't know if anybody would probably see it as an honest dialogue, as a genuine dialogue, which involves all stakeholders, which involves discussion on all kinds of issues. So that's not what the 60 or so organizations in the diaspora were observing. It's not inclusive because it leaves out the OLF, the OLA, and the TPLF, and then beyond inclusivity, participation in the imperatives of transparency, um, uh, the atmosphere, the entire atmosphere in the country does not lend itself to have a national discussion. When we say inclusivity, it's not only the elite, the political elite, that should discuss or participate in national dialogue. If it is a national dialogue, it will be national. It will be national at all levels. People in the nation or in the country must be participating in the discussions. And should not be an elite bargain that will be decided at the highest level of the government and then imposed on the people. That would not address the issues. I think people should be heard, but that's not the way it is designed. So it is set up to fail as a national dialogue. It's only set up to consolidate the power of the PP and advance the agenda of some of the political organizations that you showed here. What is going to be in the agenda? What is going to be in the agenda is the change of the constitution, the redesign of the federal arrangement, everything that these Oromo organizations, Somali organizations, and other multinational federalist forces had been asking for is going to be thrown under the rug. So it's not their issues. And participating in this is simply to try to legitimize this government that had the claim to legitimacy simply by winning sham elections. So there is no hope that this will succeed because everything that must not be done when you are designing a national dialogue had been done. Everything that you must do in order to succeed in national dialogue had not been done. So it is set up to be a failure from the very start. So that's the point that the Oromo organizations were saying, that the atmosphere, it should be first, peace is needed. Settlement, the political settlement of war is needed. People who are in famine situations, in conflict, in dire need situation cannot participate. The country cannot participate while foreign forces are roaming the country, and the design is not one that is allowing for participation. So basically, it's saying that the idea of a national dialogue is a good idea, but this particular national dialogue in its design and its mission and in its possible accomplishment is not one that is likely to succeed.
Thank you, Professor Sgal. Yosef, I want to go to you with the international dimension, if you can talk about that as well. So this is a document that just was produced this month by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia. and a re-engagement strategy. In this document, they go to the details of which countries said what before the war, and what to expect from the European Union, from the US, and so on. So there is a section where they talk about what the US wants us to hear, or how to engage with the US from the national dialogue perspective, and the same with the European Union, and so on. So you can also speak to Eritrea's role in all this, if how it would be seen. So
Uh-huh.
anything you want to say about that?
Okay, yeah. Well, it was 50 pages, I believe. So
Yeah.
I didn't read it all, but this is how I see it. Um, First of all, we could say outright, it will never happen. This national dialogue that outsiders are demanding, the statement of from the worldwide Oromos and the others, this will never happen. PP is not stupid. It would commit suicide if it does that kind of national. If it conducts that kind of national dialogue, it will commit suicide. So why is it then doing it? The question is, why is it doing it? Because what we have to look at is these organizations. For example, the 60 organizations that we have seen on the Oromo side. And another one in Somali and the rest in Ethiopia, they have no leverage. They have no leverage, to impose their will in Ethiopia. So the PP knows that. As a result of that, the only thing that worries the Prosperity Party is the pressure from the West. And that's why this national dialogue is being conducted primarily with with the West in mind. With the West in mind, it's the same thing like the release of the prisoners. Remember when the prisoners like Jawhar and Bekele and Sibhat came out. That gave Abiy a lot of mileage. He got out of that simple act, of that simple farce. He got a lot of mileage out of that. The West wanted to be fooled at this time, and they are demanding some kind of theatrics from him. So the next one, I believe this is the next one, which is the national dialogue itself, is primarily meant for the West, and the West might buy it because they are in that position where they are telling him do something, although they are not saying it outright. Even do something to fool us, So he is, for example, okay, if you look at it, if we go back and look at the criteria that both Faisal and Hezkel has been mentioning, the criteria of inclusivity, impartiality, transparency, credibility, participatory, and all of that, that have been mentioned in the statement by the worldwide Oromo organizations and the others. If you look at that, it's almost any dialogue in the world, the universality of it. You see the universality of it. You could even use, a shortcut. You could even use UMD's criteria of understanding, measuring, and doing to assess what's right and what's wrong in all of this. For example, when you come to understanding, you try to understand what the problem is, the comprehensive problem throughout the area. And you try to frame it in a language precise enough to deal with all the variables of this crisis. Now, who owns that language at this moment? It's the Prosperity Party that owns that language, and it will use the kind of language that will go directly opposite to this one. For example, vague ones, probably with the unity of Ethiopia at the center of it. So this will be on the measurement side, for example. If you look at who is going to participate? I mean, which groups represent which population? Would it be through ethnic groups, religious groups, political parties, or anything like that, you know? So the question is, who manipulates this categorization? Remember these parameters of national dialogue was started a little bit earlier by Liddetu and the other so-called moderate Amharas. And they came, even though they said all the right things when it comes to the plight of the Tigray people in this crisis, they came out with a measurement. The measurement was meant to be exactly what they wanted to do. For example, remember the numbers that they came with? 20 to 20% for prosperity part, 20 to 25% for the Ahudawian, the centralists. Already, you see, almost 50% is given to the Amhara nationalists or to the nationalists in general. Now, look at the categorical cheating, because the people that are PP are the ones who are mostly the unionists. Yet, you divide them into two categories and you provide them 25%. The idea is, you see, if you do this kind of manipulation with a measurement, then you will get what you want to get out of it. So, in the measurement also, the PP will manipulate it in whichever way it wants. On the third one, the doing part is, suppose, let's say, they come up with a progressive proposals from all the meeting. Who is going to implement it? How is it going to be implemented? These are also the other part where the government will cheat. Because, for example, in Africa nowadays, it's not the lack of constitutions that is the problem. Almost every nation has a progressive constitution, but it is in the implementation of the constitution that things go wrong. It's the same thing here. So all that I'm saying is the PP has a power to manipulate the language, the agenda itself, to manipulate the participation, which is the various the measurement, and then it could also manipulate on the implementation. Therefore, if there is no one that has a leverage on these three fronts, it's a foregone conclusion that this will turn out to be another farce. I don't see how Eritrea gets into this, so I will just stop there. Okay.
I'm sorry. So Faisal, you want to interject, but I want first also to the details of the ONLF statement. They even go to the level of what many people were worried about, because there is a rumor, quote unquote, that says Abiy told his cabinet and his close allies that by bringing OLA, TPLF into negotiation, all that, he would use that opportunity to even geolocate them and, kill the leadership. So there is one question that, or one ask they have in the ONLF statement: provision of security to key experts in this and so on. So, do you see any detail that's being provided by this worldwide professional civic community organized from the Oromo side and the ONLF and others as well, like Joseph was mentioning? Anything to change at this stage what the PP was planning for months now?
So, for the record, ONLF's top leadership is inside the country. They're in Jijiga, including the chairman and former chairman and the central committee. So, in their case, they made it clear that their rejections to the processes and procedures for the negotiation in terms of all these issues, inclusivity, space, transparency. They will voice all that on a peaceful means. So they go to Addis Ababa. I don't know if Abiy would be stupid enough to call leadership from different groups and then assassinate. I think that may not bode well for him. But I think as a society, we approached this whole discussion of dialogue in a very simplistic way, uh, mainly because we have seen dialogue is succeeding in South Africa. And we always quote and take example from what had happened in South Africa without really comparing that to the Ethiopian condition, which in my opinion is completely different, even the way donors see. And this, I think both Scale and Joseph touched in a way, this is a theater for the donors. I don't think a PP or anybody at this point in time is serious to have negotiations and talks based, given the principles that Scale eloquently put together. I don't think PP is conducting these talks based on those principles. They can articulate that, but they are not serious. I think, first of all, we need to move away from using the South African example as the model for use, because South Africa was not putting in front of the world its territorial integrity or its national sovereignty being threatened. Ethiopia is showing the rest of the world, particularly the West, that these groups that you mentioned, TDF, OLA, are against our sovereignty and national existence. Therefore, we don't trust them. And I think the West has shown some leniency towards Abiy. If you read their document that they are discussing who supported, who opposed, they basically saying all African nations that we talked to sided with us to purge and to completely destroy TPLF. They also talk about how there was some difficulties around the relationship with America, but most of it is on the mending at this point in time. And this proposed, futile negotiation and talks is for the consumption of the West. I don't think, as Joseph really put it, I don't think PP is ready to put its power dynamics as it exists today into a question. And Lidetu and that team, as progressive as they are compared to Ndargacho and the others, they still wanted to work within that, power dynamics of the what you call the centrists having the power, if not, more, at least at equal. That's why you always see currency made into, the different groups, PP, Ezama, and all these people could be in one group and one party from ideological point of view. But in order to get more representation, they have been, sort of multiplied. So I think this talks, Abiy is aware of it. And I think the groups that are a bit challenging and questioning the processes and principles are already aware the fact that the proposed talks are meaningless at this point in time. None of the conditions that will make these talks possible are in place. So dead on arrival, literally, you can say, this is dead on arrival. In the sense, if you look from what we would have expected from talks we would have expected to address both short term and long term. If these talks were serious, it will have one sentence that really serves as the principle of the talks. And it would be this way: the Ethiopian national dialogue is a journey, but not an end in itself. That journey opens doors for many things, including bringing all stakeholders, as we said, and also not making the end of that process the existence and the bolstering of the existing government. I think by saying a journey and not an end would have given us also a way and a room to negotiate what the outcome would be. I don't think PP is ready to question and put on the table the outcome. And most Ethiopians are asking some change around the structure that exists now. So, in my opinion, the talks are dead on arrival. And ONLF is not the only group. I think you have also Congress for Somali Cause, which is mostly now populated by young, educated Somalis in the diaspora. There is the Federal Somali FEB, which is a democratic opposition group. So there are a lot, but those are not even attended to by the federal government, and they are not in the focus. And I'm sure there are a lot of other small groups in Sidama, in the Afar area. And so basically, PP with its 10 million registered members is basically saying we are speaking for everybody, except the two groups that they have already designated as terrorist groups, such as TPLF and OLA. And then the other is such as the ONLF. They would want them to come under the umbrella of the BB chapter in the regional government. That would also be applicable to Sidama, to Benishangul, so basically it's just a window dressing for the power structure that we have today. And I think they already convinced the Western world, who, in my opinion, never wants to go where the Ethiopian masses go. The US always wanted, as Joseph indicated, a safe face saving, a B to give them something to work around. And I think he gave them something to work around, and both sides now feel comfortable to just do a window dressing type and say talks have been structured.
Thank you, Faisal. I just want to say on this page, Professor Scale, on one of the conditions or the ask here is the unconditional and unimpeded provision of humanitarian assistance, and it specifically goes to the vital services, banking, telecom, transportation, electricity, and so on. One thing that stood out for me in that for Ethiopian Foreign Ministry statement is, again, the same point you all mentioned about serving the interest or what the Western countries are asking. So here they are mentioning about giving back these basic services to the people. It's talking about more on Tigray. And the starting point for this statement is, again, to avoid any pressure from the Western countries. So the whole if national dialogue, even giving basic services to the people, is related to what US or Europe and so on is willing to take or to accept. Where do you see this going? I mean, in the next weeks and months, I think they will go into the national dialogue, national commission, establish all that. So how do you see things playing out in the vis-a-vis what is happening within Ethiopia?
I guess, as you saw in the statement and other statements as well, both the Worldwide Oromos, civic professional advocacy and human rights and community organizations, and in also almost directly in the statement from ONLF. Look, there are two issues that we look at least in this case. First, it's the setup of the national dialogue, so the entry point, and the other is what Joseph was saying, the implementation at the end. So if you look at the design itself, if you look at the way it is, nobody is under any illusion that the PP means what it says. It's not in its DNA. And as I raised earlier, this kind of understanding or national consensus forming efforts should have been done in 2018, not now. Should have been done when the transition began. If they were earnest about it, if Abiy Ahmed was really earnest about settling issues that are outstanding, issues that were not settled in the 1991 political settlements, he should have done it then, because the revolution of 2018 that brought him to power did not ask him to dismantle the gains that the nations and nationalities in Ethiopia had achieved after a struggle of 50 years, but to fulfill the promise of democratic transition. That's what was required. So nobody is under any illusion that this is really a genuine national dialogue. Like I said at the beginning, it does not fulfill the basic requirements for success that we already know. Is it inclusive? You know that it is not inclusive. They have already said at the outset that some organizations are not going to be participating. Is it holistic in its agenda? It is not. The whole thing that they're talking about is how to change the constitution and how to change the federal system. That's the agenda. Is it transparent? It is not. It is still under the control of the parliament, which is basically made up of the Prosperity Party. Is it going to be participatory? That's not the way they even designed it, because the way the proclamation came out, what it says is that there is differences between the elites and we'll get a consensus, and that there is really no legitimate cause that the nations and nationalities have. So it begins with denial. Is it credible? Is the convener credible? Is it clear? Are there clear rules? We do not know. So from the very start, from the get-go, it's not going to happen. At the end, who's going to implement it it's a good question that Yosef raised. If there is an agreement, there should be a pre-arranged agreement among the stakeholders to agree to it, that whatever outcome comes out of the national dialogue, they are going to be willing to implement it. Well, what you have right now is the Prosperity Party, and when the commission has done completed its work after 3 years, that's what the proclamation is, after 3 years. Well, it's going to be used by Abiy Ahmed as a campaign slogan that he had brought the country together. Maybe that's the way it is. But look, what is he doing right now? As Faisal said, it looks like the international community, both the UN, the US, the EU, they're not seeing any alternative, and they are dying to see something going on in the country other than war. They don't see any alternative. They are ready to prop up and shore up Abiy Ahmed because they see only him to be able to keep law and order in the country. They see only him. I'm not saying that they are right about it. He seems to have succeeded just by talking about national dialogue. He seems to have succeeded in convincing the international committee he is a moderate who means well, who means to rise up above ethnic barrier and unify the country. He seems to have succeeded in that respect. But secondly, the national dialogue is not about national dialogue. It is to buy time for military preparation. There are about 40,000 unwilling conscripts in the Oromia region that are now being sent to the 5 or 6 military training camps. There are about 20,000 from the south. There are about 10,000 from the Amhara region, and that lower number is not because the Amhara region is not trying to, they're not willing to participate in this war, but because the Amhara youth are flocking into the militia and the Fano. So all the government is doing right now is preparing for war. It is to buy time to prepare for war. Let's speak about it. That is exactly what he is trying to do. So no one is under any illusion that this is going to succeed. But based on what we see right now, is it like a broad set of issues that they're going to discuss? No, it is a preordained. Change the constitution and dismantle the federal structure. That's what's going to be. And that's what the outcome is going to be. And who is going to implement that? Is it now, to succeed, it should be convened by a credible organization or body, but this is the permanent government institution that are going to oversee it. Well, the PP is not an arbiter here, so it's not going to happen Abiy is using it for consolidation of power, but we have to be able to show the national dialogue for what it is, and that's what the statement from Ogaden National Liberation Front and from the political parties, Oromo political parties in the country. It is not that anyone expect that this national dialogue is going to be the save all for Ethiopia. It's not going to end the war. In fact, it's preparing for war. So it's really nothing. It's just a drama that the government is used to, and unfortunately seems to have succeeded in convincing the international community that he's a moderate guy who will save Ethiopia.
Great. Faisal, Yosef, though, you can add anything you want and then give us your final word for the day as well.
Okay. To me, the pessimism goes further than we have been talking about. Suppose there was the kind of national dialogue which is fair and just with all the criteria that meets all the criteria. You know, the question that comes to my mind is: would it be fair to Tigray? Because we are all the time assuming that when the majority gets power, when the democratic process, when we get it right, when we get it right in regard to the democratic process, then everything will be okay. But for example, genocides happen in democracies as well as in dictatorships. People that have been voted have been doing, you know, for example, Hitler came to power through the vote, through the democratic system. Now, what I'm trying to say is there a goodwill? Is there enough goodwill for Tigray, aside from, of the obvious ones? For example, we see now the genocidal effort taken from the Amhara side and now the Afar side. But I'm not sure the others also have the kind of goodwill that is necessary for Tigray to survive in this kind of environment. So for me, the question is, would Tigray, for example, with its small population, given its this huge problem that it is facing right now, I wonder, even if there is the right kind of national dialogue, that it will be helpful to Tigray. There was one quotation from what's his name, Alo, the guy that wrote that.
Well,
Yeah, he mentioned that in one point he said that there shouldn't be a dialogue between Ethiopia and Tigray alone. The kind of dialogue that we are hearing, whether it's true or not, the kind of dialogue between Ethiopia, it should be, all inclusive. That is his proposal. But to me, could Tigray afford that? For example, Tigray at this point in time, where it's cornered, where more than almost, as you said, about 40% of its people are on the verge of starvation, where thousands of people are dying now. Does Tigray fare better if it talks directly? Because you see, it seems to me it's not simply Amhara and or PP or Afar against Tigray. It's more or less Ethiopia against Tigray. So if there is anything substantive that comes out of a dialogue which would be useful for Tigray, it would be Tigray one-on-one with Ethiopia. So at a different level, when I look at it, it seems to me that Tigray could only, especially at this time, it can't afford to talk about the rest of Ethiopia. Although if it can get some kind of concessions, it would be from PP, and it has its own leverage. The leverage that it has is, of course, the leverage of armed forces. So that, to me, brings the issue of national dialogue. If you look at a meta level, I become more pessimistic because I am not so sure that democracy in Ethiopia or that the majority in Ethiopia would do the right thing.
Okay, thank you. I think the dialogue and negotiation, I think the negotiation would be where it will be taken care of, in my view. But I think that's a good point. Faisal, your final word for the day?
Yeah, I think Joseph is raising existential questions for Tigray, but as Somalis, we have been raising this issue a lot longer than Tigray has been raising, to be honest with you. As you know, in history, we have only been annexed to Ethiopia since 1954. And even the maps that Ethiopia presented to the UN after the League, when it was becoming a member of the United Nations, the Howth and Reserve area is not included in that map. So technically, the international maps that Ethiopia has deposited at the UN, unless they fetched it later on, does not even capture the Somali. And in terms of really level of genocide, we all saw what happened to TPLF and Tigray and the people of Tigray. As far, not that far from history, 2008, similar thing happened in the Somali region. Basically, that's where the whole Abdi Ilay, name surfaced in the Ethiopian lexicon. It was not only him; it was the EPRDF and the system that he was working. I mean, atrocious acts done, including at the height of the 80s, Ethiopian army raping Somali village women, in addition to the rape, giving them AIDS and spreading the AIDS. I mean, so the issues that you are raising really, in a way, put his PP and the current Abiy approach to talks naked. I think the essence of your talk and your point is to say, if talks have to take place, they have to address the central feelings of the people concerned, whether that's in Tigray, Somali, or Oromia. I think these talks that we have now are far from where Joseph is, trying to take the conversation. That's the correct way to talk. And I think that is one of the main tenets of what you call reconciliation and transitional justice, digging up the dirt inside us and coming into terms, whether that gives communities like Tigray and Somalis a complete freedom from the bondage in which they have been involuntarily, and Oromo and others. That is not what PP, nor the US, nor the donors are looking. Even Joseph, the participants have been conditioned, whether it's TPLF, OLA or ONLF and others, conditioned to play the role within a perimeter that is acceptable on the one hand to PP, on the other hand to international observers and donors. So we all are being conditioned to give away and surrender some of our God-given rights in order to at least survive under the existing circumstances. If Somalis were given today the chance, either through ONLF or through the public by direct plebiscite, they will not stay in this bondage for a day. They wouldn't even want to go to Addis Ababa for a day. But they don't have that option. Neither Tigray has that option. Maybe what you were trying to say is Tigray was on a position to fight for that, since they have already invested a lot of bloodshed in this, and I read that, and I think this half-cooked talks that people like Abiy and PP are proposing to us is not going to take the people of Ethiopia out of the quagmire and the hardship in which they are. It's just replaying the same recycle with new faces being the sponsors of the talkers. But 5 years down the line, you will have another war if we continue. That's why even experts on reconciliation and mediation will tell you to dig the dirty issues that Joseph has in mind and address them. you don't have to really, that's why I was saying it's a journey, not an end in itself. When you talk about reconciliation and mediation and talks, they don't end the day the commission gives that report to Abiy, which is what Abiy and his team are now looking at. In about 6 months, they want to finish this. He wants to go back, and what Scale was saying, 3 years down the line, he wants to appear the savior of Ethiopia, perhaps the seventh king. But that is not the principles of reconciliation and mediation. They are much more robust and more long range looking and more of a journey than India itself. And we are way, way far from that. I think the practical things I would seek, if possible, is cessation of hostility, lifting the blockade on Tigray, dismantling the uncontrolled militias throughout Amara region. That, in my opinion, now people are talking anywhere from 150,000 and up and increasing by the day. At least with the TDF, the OLA, you can tell that they have a target, and the target is government troops. I don't know what the target of Fana and those people who are less managed is. So I think Abiy is not in the mood of, either stopping the secession, taking Eritrean troops out of the country, stopping the blockade, letting Tigray kids eat and receive medicine, because these talks are even not on the table. When you have those issues that have been covered all along, that we talked eloquently so many times, I think talks are by in the sky at this point in time. And if they are not, they are dead on arrival.
Thank you, Faisal. Professor Etkel, we will finish today's show with your final words.
Yeah. Let's not, I guess, in concluding, let's not mix up two things. I think the war in Ethiopia, at least from the perspective, the conflict, the civil war in Ethiopia, from the perspective of Oromo organizations that put out, and as an Oromo myself, we have been saying that this war, of course, the scale and the magnitude is really unbelievable in Tigray. But the war started in Oromia. That's what we have been saying, that it started in Western Oromia. Everything that was done in Tigray had been done in Western Oromia, in the Walaga region. Oh, the scale is different, but everything. The art of shutting down communication lines, imposing all kinds of transportation limitation, aerial bombardment, all of those, burning villages, killing people who are associated in some way or another with Ola fighters. It had been done in southern and Western Oromia. Ending the conflict, as is in number one, ending the conflict is a precondition for the national dialogue. And that is a separate issue. The negotiations to end the conflict cannot be mixed up with the national dialogue to determine the fate of 120 million people. It is impossible to have a national dialogue while war is raging and humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding and leading political figures are languishing in prison. That's why we insisted in the Oromo community that we insisted these two should be separate. The negotiations to end the conflict should be separate from the political dialogue. Two different. So the government needs to sequence it. It is impossible to have a national dialogue where there is war. And the war is not just in Tigray, it's everywhere, in command. Genocide, the Amhara government is conducting genocide, had been conducting genocide on the command genocide, really. Maybe command is too small and it's not getting coverage, but genocide is being perpetrated by Amhara forces, by the Fano forces, using heavy guns against the command. It is happening. It has happened. It's being done against the Benishangul. So in this conflict, ending the conflict, everybody is in it. Yes, the proportion is different in Tigray, but war is everywhere, is what the Oromos are saying. So we are having solidarity with the Tigran people. We also are in the same boat. We are in the same situation, is what we're saying. So we can't end the war in one area and can continue it to rage in another area and then have a national dialogue. But there should be a at least a three-level sequence of the effort to get to a national dialogue. First, there should be phase one, where there would be preconditions for negotiation should be met, like cessation of hostilities, maybe simultaneous declaration of unilateral ceasefire. But the conditions, even for negotiations, are not there. Forget about negotiations to end the war. It's not there. These conditions must be met first. Trust building measures must be accomplished first. Then you get to this phase two. The phase two is where negotiating peace occurs, where both sides or all sides agree and develop a framework and principles for negotiations, name negotiators and arbiters, develop a program of negotiations, and then actually negotiate, develop a program of implementation, and then determine the way to return to the status quo ante. Only after that could you talk about national dialogue. Only after that. So the negotiations to end war should be treated as separate from the negotiations about the future of Ethiopia. In that war, in the negotiations for war, yes, Tigray, but everybody else also. We are on the same side, is what the Oromo and the others are saying, that we are in the same boat. We're under the same gun. It's under the same government that we're suffering the same inequities. So it will not be a separate to bilateral negotiations. If it is an end to a civil war in Ethiopia, it would be an end to, within that framework, there could be bilateral talks. But we're in it together. We're in a civil war together. We're suffering together. We're all experiencing genocide together. The distraction is all the same. As I said, as the Amhara elite had been saying, and as the deputy chief of staff had said, it's only because we have some war that we need to finish in the north. Other than that, we're going to come back to the north, is what he said. So historically, Faisal had said about the Somali, that's what everyone is saying. It is one enemy, the same predicament, the same suffering, and the war has to end. Maybe bilateral special cases could be in the negotiations, but we're in it together. So we have to separate. The last word is that it has to be sequence.
Okay, thank you very much. Today, I mean, this should end our show, and we will continue. A lot of things happening, and we'll be monitoring. And the panel will be back on Friday next week at 8 p.m. The new time we started today, it would be the starting time for the weeks to come as well. So 8 p.m. Eastern time, 5 p.m. last week on that time. Thank you so much for your time, panelists, today. And it was a very insightful conversation as usual. And have a good night from here.
Thank you.
You have been following live on YouTube and Facebook, our H panel for today. And we covered national dialogue parameters. And that was the show for today. And the H panel ends here. Before we finish, before we sign off, tomorrow at 2 p.m. At 2 p.m. Mountain Time, which would be 4 p.m. Eastern Time, Shmallis Marissa Gabramikad will be back with the news update, both in English and Amharic. So tune in for live news update from Shmallis Marissa Gabramikad in English and Amharic. Your host was Getachew Asafa. Please subscribe, share, like, so that many more can view our material. And have a good night from here.